Kenja. The end of the Alima precipitated a crisis in the village. One of the many ways in which the villagers try to exert control over the pygmies is by seeing that they are married according to Negro custom. The villager believes that this achieves two ends. It subjects the married couple to the same supernatural authority that controls married villagers, the authority of village ancestors, and by careful manipulation and matchmaking it can increase and improve his own stock of pygmies. The pygmies accept this, but in point of fact they consider a village wedding as no more than a formal betrothal at the most, and a good excuse for a mild flirtation and a great deal of feasting. If two pygmies want to get married and they are near a village, then they gladly undergo the village ritual. If two pygmies want to get married and they are near a village, then they gladly undergo the village ritual, sanctifying the bond later in their own manner. Everyone is happy. The villagers think the marriage success because it was performed according to their own customs, while the pygmy knows it is a success because it followed his as well. The villagers naturally look on the Alima as a prelude to the marriage of Akinimba, or betterly known as A, and Kiriya. The pygmies, however, regard it in no such light. They wanted to get back to the forest where the girls could get married in their own time and in their own way. This would involve no more than an exchange of visits between the families concerned and the groom's presentation to his in-laws of a large antelope and perhaps some arrows and a bow. But nonetheless they were tempted by the idea of more feasting, so there was a considerable conflict of ideas and ideals, particularly as the villagers had their own ideas as to whom the girls should marry. Villagers had their own The Alima had created a crisis in another direction also. Pumbaa, who A had loved so ardently and beaten so thoroughly to show her affection, had kept his part of the bargain by coming to the Alima house during the final week, finding his way in as a man. But once inside, instead of making love to A as he paid court to Kiriya. Fortunately for Kiriya, but unfortunately for Pumbaa, she did not respond, and without her permission, Pumbaa had no way of forcing his attentions further. So he stalked out of the Alima house, pursued by shrieks of rage from A. He took his friend Kealoki's hand briefly, then left without a word. He crossed the Ipulu and went back to his camp, and he was seen no more.
You're vain, you're game, you're insecure. You love me, you like her. You made me laugh, you made me cry. I don't know which side.
Everyone was upset because they had all felt that the sooner A got married, the better. Besides, Pumbaa was popular, so much so that some pressure was brought to bear on Kiriya to force her to accept him. But Kiriya had set her heart on a handsome youth named Atete, who was attached to the village of Kadala several miles beyond Iboyo, so she refused to have anything to do with Pumbaa. Since the prime objective was to get A married, once it was plain that Kiriya would not take Pumbaa, everyone lost interest in her and returned to the problem of her fellow initiate. Circumstance forced the issue for a while. All this was going on a close relative of A boy named Mulanga, decided to get married to Atete's sister. Nobody saw any harm in this, and so arrangements were pursued, and they were duly married. Mulanga was quite nonplussed, by the ritual, for he had spent most of his life in the forest and knew little of the village customs. He was particularly perturbed when at the end of the ceremony his bride was seized by a village woman and led away. He was not quite sure what to do and trotted behind them at a safe distance until he was able to follow his wife into the house that had been set aside for him. Mulanga's marriage meant that he was obliged to provide a sister for his bride's brother, Atete, to marry. Villagers will compensate families for the loss of a daughter by the payment of money or goods, but the pygmies find it necessary to arrange for an exchange, so that no group is ever depleted of its womenfolk. A, who had still not forgotten how she had been jilted and insulted, saw in this situation an opportunity for revenging herself on Kiriya, the unwilling receiver of Pumbaa's attentions, so she volunteered to marry Atete. Everyone, except Kiriya, was delighted, and Atete and his family agreed. By the time the date for the wedding was set, A began to have doubts, and thinking of the freedom she was about to lose, she wept day and night. But there was no escape. The villagers at Kadala had arranged for a great feast, and this made everyone all the more anxious for the wedding. Atete, however, heard of some honey far off in the forest, several days' march away, and at the last moment he set off. The villagers protested loudly, but Atete merely said that the wedding could take place at any time, but the honey could not wait. As it was only a pygmy wedding, the villagers shrugged their shoulders and forgot to notify A. So on the appointed day, when the young bride-to-be had been painted and richly oiled, she set off, weeping hard, to find when she arrived no sign of Atete, no indication no indication of any of the promised preparations for a wedding, and nobody had the least idea when a tete might be back. A brightened up at once and suggested returning to Upolu, but not having gone that far, her relatives decided to stay. Besides, this was Ngoma's village, and it could be sure being well fed.
'Cause you're hot, then you're cold, you're yes, then you're no, you're in, then you're out, you're up, then you're down, you're wrong when it's right, it's black and it's white, we fight, we break up, we kiss, we make.
An elderly village woman set out a dark and dirty 2-room house in the middle of the village and told the bridal party that they could wait there. She reluctantly went to see that food was cooked for them, and word was sent out to a tete in the forest to return quickly before the bridal party ate up the entire village. By nightfall, there was no word, but the pygmies decided that since they were being fed so well, they would stay over and see what happened the next day. They sang for a while, but things had fallen rather flat, and the singing did not last long. While the others went to sleep, A was crying again once more. The next day dragged its hot and dusty way along, and still there was no sign of the groom. The bridal party began to get as restive as the villagers, but still they decided to stay. Mulonga arrived to try and persuade his young wife to return to him, but she refused, saying she was not going to miss her brother's wedding for any husband. He retorted that it looked as though there was not going to be any wedding, to which she replied, "In that case, you will have no bride." This is one of the difficulties of sister-exchange marriage. For if one marriage breaks up and the woman returns to her home, the corresponding marriage also breaks up. Why does it have to break up? That's so stupid. Mulonga, alarmed at the prospect, set about beating his sister, asking the unfortunate A why Tete did not come, as though it was her fault. He even went so far as to say that it was no wonder nobody wanted to marry her the way she flirted. In other circumstances, A would have attacked her brother, for she was twice his size, but she had lost all of her bounce and was so miserable by this time that she just burst into tears once more, rolling over and over on the dirty floor. The second day ended more unhappily than the first, with still no news from a tete. The messenger that had been sent out had himself not returned. Early the next morning, however, the messenger came back with several leaf bundles full of honey and announced that a tete was on his way and would be arriving soon. Villagers and pygmies alike began making preparations feverishly, but by the time a tete arrived, it was too late to do anything more than a dance, and the actual wedding was postponed for yet another day. By this time, the villagers were thoroughly tired of having to feed a large party for so long, and they went through the ritual just as fast as they could. The wedding began in the morning, and A cheered up immensely when someone pointed out to her that it is better to be married than to be jilted, particularly when you were all dressed for the wedding. She laughed and giggled all the time an old village woman was telling her, as customs demand, how to behave toward her husband, what a serious business this was, and how she would be struck dead if she did not adhere to the rules. Finally, the old woman gave up and just pushed her into the bridal house, where a tete was waiting, and slammed the door on them. Shortly afterward, a rather subdued A emerged and began cooking her husband's supper. There was a great deal of speculation among the pygmies as to whether or not this union would last, but was settled when one day a tete arrived and presented his in-laws with a fine sondu antelope. He said that he was very content with his wife and had not found it necessary to feed her all that often.